The sound of my hydraulic ironworker machine cutting through half-inch steel plate at 7 in the morning was apparently the final straw for Patricia Anderson, president of the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I had just started my workday when I heard the insistent pounding on my shop door. The machine powered down as I hit the emergency stop, and I wiped the metal shavings from my work gloves before opening the door. Standing there in a lavender pantsuit with perfectly coiffed blonde hair was a woman I recognized from the neighborhood but had never actually spoken to. Her face was red, and she clutched a leather-bound folder against her chest like a shield. "Are you Eric Emerson?" she demanded, not waiting for me to speak. "I'm Patricia Anderson, HOA president, and we need to talk about that monstrosity you're operating." I glanced back at my ironworker machine, a beautiful piece of equipment that had cost me nearly $30,000. "What about it?" "It's 7 in the morning, and the noise is disturbing the entire neighborhood. I have 3 complaints already from residents on Maple Drive." I leaned against the door frame. "Madam, I'm allowed to operate equipment on my property during business hours." 7 a.m. is well within the legal noise ordinance for industrial activities in Dauphin County. Her eyes narrowed. "This is a residential neighborhood, Mr. Emerson. You can't just run a factory out of your home. It's against HOA regulations." "Actually, when I purchased this property 2 years ago, I made sure it was zoned for light industrial work. My shop is properly permitted through the county." Patricia's face somehow got redder. "The HOA supersedes your county permits. I'm issuing you a cease and desist order effective immediately. If you operate that machine again, you'll be fined $500 per day." I felt my jaw tighten. "On what grounds?" She opened her leather folder and pulled out a stapled document. "Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the Riverside Meadows Covenant. No commercial or industrial activities that create excessive noise, traffic, or visual blight. Your shop clearly violates all 3. "I'm going to need to review that with my attorney," I said calmly, though my heart was racing. "You have until Monday to comply. That's 3 days." She thrust the document into my hands and turned on her heel, her shoes clicking sharply on the concrete. I closed the shop door and looked at the cease and desist order. It was professionally printed on HOA letterhead, complete with legal jargon that would have intimidated someone who didn't know their rights. But I did know my rights, and more importantly, I knew exactly what kind of work I did. "My name is Eric Emerson, and I'm a structural steel fabricator specializing in bridge components for the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation." The ironworker machine Patricia was so concerned about wasn't just some hobby tool. It was essential equipment for fabricating structural steel members that went into highway bridges across the state. I had contracts with Penn DOT worth over $2 million annually, and my work was critical infrastructure. I pulled out my phone and called my attorney, David Schwartz. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "Eric, what's going on?" I explained the situation while reading him the cease and desist order verbatim. There was a long pause on the other end. "This is interesting," David said finally. "They're trying to use HOA regulations to shut down a state-contracted industrial operation. Do you have your Penn DOT contracts handy?" "Of course. I'm working on bridge components for the Route 322 expansion right now. Send me copies of everything. Your contracts, permits, zoning approval, and that cease and desist. I'll draft a response, but Eric, this might get messy." "How messy?" "HOAs can be incredibly persistent, especially when they think they're right. Even when they're wrong, they'll spend tens of thousands in legal fees just to prove a point." I spent the rest of the day documenting everything. My shop was a separate building on my 3-acre property, positioned at the back corner, nearly 300 feet from my nearest neighbor. The property had been zoned for light industrial use since the 1980s, grandfathered in when the housing development was built around it. I had every permit, every inspection certificate, every piece of documentation that proved my operation was completely legal. That evening, I was reviewing blueprints for a bridge deck support system when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a young woman in her late 20s holding a clipboard. "Eric Emerson," she asked. "That's me. I'm Jennifer from Compliance Solutions. The HOA hired us to conduct an inspection of your property." She held up what looked like an official-looking badge. "You have a warrant," she blinked. "I don't need a warrant. The HOA has the right to inspect properties for compliance. Not without my permission, you don't. And I'm not granting permission." Her professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Mr. Emerson, if you refuse inspection, the HOA can fine you up to $1,000 and place a lien on your property." I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app. "Please repeat that threat while I'm recording." Jennifer's eyes widened. "I'm just doing my job, sir. Your job involves threatening property owners with illegal liens." The HOA has no authority to place liens without a court order, and they certainly can't inspect my property without permission or a warrant. If you don't leave my property in the next 30 seconds, I'm calling the police for trespassing." She left quickly, practically running to her car. I forwarded the recording to David immediately. His response came within minutes. "This is even better than I thought. They're opening themselves up to serious liability. Don't engage with them further. Let me handle everything." But the HOA wasn't done. The next morning, I found a bright orange sticker plastered across my shop door declaring the building non-compliant. "Use prohibited by order of Riverside Meadows HOA." Below that was another threat about daily fines. I photographed the sticker and sent it to David, then carefully removed it. I had a deadline to meet on the Route 322 project, and I wasn't going to let some overreaching HOA president stop me from fulfilling a state contract. The Ironworker machine roared to life at 7 sharp. I had bridge plates to notch, and the state inspector was coming in 4 days to review my work before shipping. The machine's hydraulic press punched through the steel with satisfying precision, creating the exact specifications required by the engineering drawings. I was deep in concentration when the shop door burst open. Patricia stood there with 2 men in polo shirts emblazoned with HOA enforcement. "I told you to cease operations," she shouted over the machine noise. I powered down and removed my safety glasses. "And I told you I'm legally operating a permitted business on properly zoned land. You need to leave my shop immediately." "We're confiscating this equipment," one of the men said, stepping forward. He was tall and thick-necked, clearly hired for intimidation value. I positioned myself between them and the ironworker. "If you touch my equipment, I'm calling the police and pressing charges for theft and vandalism. That machine costs $30,000 and it's currently being used for state infrastructure projects." "State projects," Patricia laughed. "You're making this up. Nobody does state work out of their garage. It's not a garage. It's a licensed fabrication shop, and yes, I have active contracts with Penn DOT. Would you like to see them?" The doubt flickered across her face for just a moment before the stubbornness returned. "I don't care who you claim to work for. The HOA regulations are clear." "Your regulations don't supersede federal and state law, Miss Anderson. Now get out of my shop before I have you arrested for trespassing and attempted theft." The 2 enforcement guys looked at Patricia uncertainly. She started to say something else, but I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "Yes, I need police at 4247 Industrial Park Road. 3 people have broken into my shop and are attempting to confiscate my equipment. Patricia's eyes went wide. We didn't break in. The door was unlocked. I didn't invite you in, which makes it trespassing, I said calmly. Then into the phone. Yes, I'll stay on the line. They left quickly, Patricia's voice shrill as she promised this wasn't over. The police arrived 10 minutes later and I gave them the full story, including all the documentation David had prepared. The officer, a veteran cop named Martinez, shook his head as he reviewed everything. Mr. Emerson, you're clearly in the right here. If they come back, call us immediately. What they attempted could be considered criminal mischief at minimum, possibly attempted theft. I'm more concerned about them interfering with state contracts, I said. I have deadlines to meet. Officer Martinez made detailed notes. Document everything. From what you're telling me, this HOA is way out of line. After he left, I returned to work, but my concentration was shot. I managed to complete 2 more bridge plates before calling it a day. That evening, David called with news. I sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA and their attorney. I also contacted Penn DOT and informed them of the situation. Eric, they're very interested in this. Interested how? The Route 322 expansion is a critical infrastructure project. You're one of their primary fabricators for that section. If the HOA successfully shuts you down, it could delay the entire project by months and cost the state millions. PennDOT's legal department is prepared to intervene. I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. This is getting bigger than I expected. It's going to get bigger still. I also filed a complaint with the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office regarding the HOA's attempted property seizure. That crosses into criminal territory. The weekend passed quietly, but Monday morning brought a certified letter from the HOA's attorney, a firm called Steinberg and Associates out of Philadelphia. The letter was a masterpiece of legal intimidation, claiming I was in violation of 17 separate HOA covenants and threatening immediate legal action unless I complied with their demands. David's response was even better. He sent them a 40-page brief complete with case law, state regulations, and copies of my Penn DOT contracts. He also included a counterclaim for harassment, illegal attempted seizure, and interference with state contracts. The demand was for $250,000 in damages. That got their attention. Within hours, I received a call from a lawyer named Robert Steinberg himself. Mr. Emerson, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. My client, the HOA, is simply trying to maintain neighborhood standards by attempting to seize my equipment and interfere with state infrastructure projects, I said. That's an interesting definition of maintaining standards. Perhaps we can reach a compromise. What if you limited your working hours to, say, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. on weekdays only? I already work reasonable hours. The noise complaint that started this was at 7 a.m., which is well within county ordinances. I don't operate past 6 p.m. or on weekends unless there's an emergency state deadline. The HOA feels the industrial nature of your operation is inappropriate for a residential area. The property was zoned for light industrial use before the HOA even existed. I'm grandfathered in, fully permitted, and operating legally. Your client has no grounds for any of their demands. There was a pause. Mr. Emerson, HOAs have significant legal authority to enforce their covenants. Not when those covenants violate state and federal law, not when they interfere with state contracts, and definitely not when they attempt illegal property seizures. Mr. Steinberg, I'm done negotiating. If the HOA continues this harassment, I'll pursue every legal remedy available, including criminal charges against Miss Anderson personally. That seems excessive. You know what's excessive. Being threatened with illegal fines, having enforcement goons try to steal my equipment, and being told I can't fulfill state infrastructure contracts because someone doesn't like industrial noise at 7 a.m. I'm working with PennDOT's legal team now. If you want to pursue this, you'll be fighting the state of Pennsylvania. The call ended shortly after. David thought it went well, but warned me that HOAs sometimes doubled down even when they were clearly wrong. He was right. 2 days later, the HOA filed a lawsuit in Dauphin County Court, seeking an injunction to halt all industrial activities on my property. They also filed for $10,000 in fines for continued violations since their initial cease and desist. David was furious when he called me. This is the dumbest legal strategy I've seen in 20 years. They're going to lose, and it's going to cost them a fortune. How long until this goes to court? The injunction hearing is in 2 weeks. The judge will review the evidence and make a ruling. Eric, you need to bring in someone from PennDOT to testify about your contracts. That's when I called Mark Richardson, a structural engineer I worked with regularly at PennDOT. Mark was a 15-year veteran of the department and had overseen dozens of bridge projects. When I explained the situation, he laughed. An HOA is trying to shut down a bridge fabrication shop. That's insane. Eric, your work is critical to our projects. I'll testify and I'll bring documentation of every bridge you've worked on for us. I appreciate that, Mark. This whole thing is getting out of hand. What the HOA doesn't understand is that there are only a handful of fabricators in Pennsylvania qualified to do what you do. If they shut you down, it doesn't just affect one project. It affects infrastructure across the entire state. I'll make sure the judge understands that. The next 2 weeks were tense. The HOA escalated their campaign, sending letters to all my neighbors claiming I was operating an illegal factory that would lower property values. Several neighbors I'd never met suddenly started giving me hostile looks. Someone spray-painted "Shut IT down" on my shop door one night. I filed a police report and Officer Martinez took it seriously. "This is escalating, Mr. Emerson. Have you considered getting security cameras?" "Already ordered them. They'll be installed tomorrow." The cameras proved prescient. 3 nights before the court hearing, they caught Patricia Anderson herself creeping onto my property at 2 a.m. with a can of spray paint. She wrote, "Illegal operation" across my shop door in bright red letters. I called Martinez immediately and sent him the footage. He arrived within 20 minutes, and we watched the video together on my laptop. "That's definitely her," he said. "This is criminal mischief, trespassing, and possibly harassment. Mr. Emerson, do you want to press charges?" "Absolutely." Patricia Anderson was arrested at her home at 8 a.m. the following morning. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Apparently, being arrested for vandalizing property wasn't a good look for an HOA president. David called me that afternoon, barely containing his glee. "Eric, this just made our case 10 times stronger. The HOA president criminally vandalizing your property demonstrates a pattern of harassment and illegal behavior. Their attorney called me begging for a settlement." "What did you tell them?" "That we'll see them in court." The hearing took place on a Thursday morning in early March. The courtroom was surprisingly full. Patricia was there with Robert Steinberg and 2 other attorneys from his firm. I sat with David, and behind us were Mark Richardson and 3 other PennDOT engineers who had volunteered to testify. The deputy director of PennDOT's Bridge Division, Sarah Chen, had also come. Judge Michael Brennan presided. He was a no-nonsense jurist in his 60s with a reputation for cutting through legal noise to find the facts. He reviewed the preliminary filings with a furrowed brow before looking up at both parties. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Judge Brennan said. "The HOA is seeking an injunction to halt industrial operations on Mr. Emerson's property, claiming it violates their covenants. Mr. Emerson contends his operation is properly permitted and zoned, and that he fabricates bridge components for the State Department of Transportation." "Is that accurate?" both attorneys confirmed. The judge nodded. "Mr. Steinberg, present your case." Steinberg stood and launched into a prepared argument about the sanctity of HOA covenants and the importance of maintaining neighborhood character. He presented noise level readings taken by a private company, showing decibel levels that exceeded what he claimed were reasonable standards. "Your Honor, Mr. Emerson's industrial activities have disrupted the peaceful enjoyment of property for dozens of families. The HOA has a duty to protect these residents and maintain property values. We're not asking Mr. Emerson to cease operations entirely, merely to relocate them to a more appropriate industrial zone." Judge Brennan looked unimpressed but gestured for David to respond. David stood with a thick binder of documents. "Your Honor, the HOA's entire case is built on a fundamental misunderstanding of property law and state authority. Mr. Emerson's property was zoned for light industrial use in 1983, decades before this HOA was established. The Pennsylvania Municipalities Planning Code explicitly protects pre-existing uses. The HOA cannot enforce covenants that contradict state zoning law." He began presenting evidence. The original zoning designation, my county permits, state licenses, and detailed documentation of every inspection and approval my shop had passed. Then he dropped the real bomb. "More importantly, Your Honor, Mr. Emerson fabricates critical infrastructure components for Pennsylvania highway bridges under direct contract with Penn DOT. These aren't hobbyist projects. These are structural steel members that support bridges carrying thousands of vehicles daily. The Route 322 expansion currently underway depends on Mr. Emerson's work. Any disruption to his operations would delay that project and potentially cost the state millions of dollars." Judge Brennan's eyebrows rose. "Is someone from Penn DOT here to verify this?" Sarah Chen stood. "Your Honor, I'm Sarah Chen, Deputy Director of PennDOT's Bridge Division. Mr. Emerson has been a certified fabricator for our department for 6 years. His work is exemplary, and he's currently fabricating components for 3 active bridge projects across central Pennsylvania. The quality of his work and his ability to meet deadlines make him an invaluable contractor. How many fabricators like Mr. Emerson does Penn DOT work with in this region? 4, Your Honor. Losing one would significantly impact our project timelines." The judge made notes, then turned to Steinberg. "Counsel, did you research the property's zoning status before filing this lawsuit?" Steinberg shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, the HOA's position is that their covenants supersede zoning in matters of neighborhood governance." "That's not how property law works, Mr. Steinberg. You should know that." Judge Brennan flipped through more documents. "I'm also concerned about the allegations of harassment against the HOA president. Mr. Emerson, you filed criminal charges." "Yes, Your Honor, Miss Anderson was arrested for vandalizing my property. I have video evidence." "I've seen the police report. Miss Anderson, stand please." Patricia rose stiffly, her face pale. The confident woman who had barged into my shop was gone, replaced by someone who looked like she was facing the consequences of her actions for the first time. "Miss Anderson, Did you trespass on Mr. Emerson's property and vandalize his shop? She glanced at her attorneys, but Judge Brennan cut her off. Answer the question directly, please. I was trying to document violations, Your Honor. At 2 a.m., with spray paint, that's not documentation, Miss Anderson, that's vandalism. He turned back to the attorneys. I'm denying the HOA's request for an injunction. Mr. Emerson's operation is legal, properly permitted, and serves a critical public interest. The HOA's covenants cannot override state law or interfere with state contracts. Steinberg stood quickly. Your Honor, we'd like to request a continuance to present additional evidence. What additional evidence could possibly change the facts here? The property is legally zoned. Mr. Emerson is properly licensed and permitted, and he's performing work essential to state infrastructure. Your client has not only filed a meritless lawsuit, but engaged in criminal harassment. Motion denied. Then Judge Brennan did something I didn't expect. Furthermore, I'm awarding Mr. Emerson attorney's fees and costs associated with defending this action. The HOA's lawsuit was frivolous and filed in bad faith. I'm also referring this matter to the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office for review of the HOA's attempted property seizure and harassment campaign. David squeezed my shoulder. We had won completely, but the judge wasn't finished. Miss Anderson, you're to have no contact with Mr. Emerson or his property. The criminal charges will proceed separately. If I hear that the HOA has made any further attempts to interfere with Mr. Emerson's legal business operations, I will hold the board members in contempt and consider sanctions against your attorneys. Do I make myself clear? Everyone confirmed they understood. As we left the courtroom, Sarah Chen shook my hand. Eric, I'm sorry you had to go through this. If the HOA had succeeded, it would have set a dangerous precedent for infrastructure contractors across the state. I'm just glad it's over, I said. Mark Richardson grinned. Over. Man, this is just beginning. Wait until the Attorney General gets involved. He was right. 3 weeks later, the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office opened a formal investigation into the Riverside Meadows HOA. The investigation focused on their attempted property seizure, their use of intimidation tactics, and their filing of illegal liens against homeowners who challenged their authority. It turned out I wasn't the only person they had targeted. As the investigation progressed, 17 other homeowners came forward with complaints. The HOA had threatened liens against a retired teacher who painted her house a non-approved color. They had tried to fine a veteran $7,500 for parking his boat in his own driveway. They had even attempted to foreclose on an elderly widow who was 3 months behind on HOA dues because she was in the hospital. The investigation revealed that Patricia Anderson and 2 other board members had been using HOA funds for personal expenses, including vacations disguised as board retreats and expensive dinners claimed as necessary meetings. Over 3 years, they had misappropriated nearly $120,000 in homeowner dues. The Attorney General's office filed criminal charges against Patricia Anderson for theft, fraud, and abuse of authority. The 2 other board members were charged as accomplices. The HOA's management company was also implicated for failing to properly oversee the board's finances. Patricia's arrest made the local news. I watched the coverage with mixed feelings. Part of me felt vindicated, but mostly I just felt exhausted. The whole ordeal had consumed 3 months of my life and caused unnecessary stress when I should have been focused on my work. The trial happened in September. I was called as a witness to describe the harassment and attempted equipment seizure. Mark Richardson testified about the importance of my work to state infrastructure projects. Other homeowners described their own experiences with the HOA's overreach and threats. Patricia's defense was weak. Her attorneys tried to argue that she was simply enforcing HOA rules, but the financial evidence was damning. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Judge Brennan, who had presided over the original injunction hearing, also handled the criminal case. When it came time for sentencing, he was harsh. "Miss Anderson, you abused a position of trust to enrich yourself and harass your neighbors. You filed frivolous lawsuits, attempted illegal property seizures, and engaged in criminal vandalism. Your actions could have disrupted critical state infrastructure projects and cost Pennsylvania taxpayers millions of dollars. This court takes such behavior seriously." He sentenced her to 3 years in prison, with 18 months to be served, and the remainder suspended pending restitution and probation. She was also ordered to pay back the misappropriated funds plus fines totaling $200,000. The 2 other board members received lighter sentences due to their cooperation, but both served jail time. The HOA's management company was fined and banned from operating in Pennsylvania. As for the Riverside Meadows HOA itself, the scandal led to its complete restructuring. The remaining homeowners voted to dissolve the existing covenant restrictions and create a much simpler, more limited HOA focused solely on maintaining common areas and ensuring properties met basic county standards. The new board included several people who had been victimized by Patricia's regime, including the retired teacher and the veteran with the boat. They reached out to me personally to apologize. The new president, a reasonable guy named Tom who worked as an accountant, met me at a coffee shop in downtown Harrisburg. "Eric, on behalf of the new board, I want to apologize for everything you went through. What Patricia did was unconscionable. We're committed to making sure nothing like that ever happens again." "I appreciate that, Tom. I just want to do my work in peace." "You will. We've completely rewritten the covenants. There's no language restricting properly permitted businesses. If you're legal with the county and state, you're legal with us." We shook hands, and that was finally the end of it, or so I thought. 2 months later, I received an unexpected letter from Penn DOT. Inside was a commendation for my work on the Route 322 expansion, and a notification that I had been selected for a 5-year master contract to fabricate bridge components for highway projects across central Pennsylvania. The contract was worth over $12 million. Sarah Chen called me the same day the letter arrived. "Eric, your handling of that HOA situation impressed a lot of people here. You didn't let them bully you into shutting down a legitimate business, and you protected your ability to fulfill state contracts. That's the kind of reliability and determination we value in our contractors." "I was just trying to do my job," I said. "That's exactly my point. You stayed focused on the work even when facing serious harassment. That tells us you're someone we can count on when projects get complicated." The master contract transformed my business. I hired 2 employees and expanded my shop, adding another Ironworker machine and upgrading my equipment. The property's industrial zoning allowed for the expansion, and this time, there were no HOA complaints. In fact, the neighborhood became surprisingly supportive. Once people understood that I was fabricating bridges for state highways, their perspective shifted. Instead of seeing my shop as a nuisance, they saw it as an important business serving the public good. Several neighbors even came by to see the work, fascinated by the process of creating massive steel components that would support bridges they drove across every day. One neighbor, a retired civil engineer named Paul, became particularly interested. He would stop by occasionally to discuss structural engineering principles and share stories from his own career working on major construction projects. It was nice to connect with someone who understood the technical challenges and precision required for bridge fabrication. The Route 322 expansion was completed in November, ahead of schedule. Penn DOT organized a ribbon-cutting ceremony, and Mark Richardson insisted I attend. Standing there watching state officials praise the project, knowing that critical components had come from my shop, gave me an enormous sense of pride. After the ceremony, Mark pulled me aside. "See that middle span?" He pointed to a section of the bridge stretching over the Susquehanna River. "Those deck support beams are your work. That bridge will carry traffic for 50 years or more. Long after we're gone, your fabrication will still be serving people." That perspective stayed with me. What Patricia Anderson had seen as a noisy nuisance was actually an essential part of Pennsylvania's infrastructure. The ironworker machine she wanted silenced was creating components that made safe transportation possible for hundreds of thousands of people. The criminal case against Patricia and the other board members had broader implications beyond my situation. The Pennsylvania Attorney General's office used the case to launch a statewide review of HOA practices. They discovered that abusive HOA boards were a widespread problem, with homeowners across Pennsylvania facing similar issues of overreach, financial mismanagement, and intimidation. The state legislature responded by passing new regulations governing HOAs. The reforms required annual financial audits, limited the fees HOAs could charge without homeowner votes, established clear procedures for challenging HOA decisions, and created penalties for board members who abused their authority. The bill was nicknamed Patricia's Law in the media, a dubious legacy for someone who had started out claiming to protect neighborhood property values. I testified before a state legislative committee during the bill's development. It was intimidating sitting in the Capitol building in Harrisburg, speaking to elected officials about my experience. But I felt it was important to show how HOA overreach could affect not just individual homeowners, but also businesses and state operations. My situation involved state infrastructure contracts, I told the committee. But the underlying problem is that some HOA boards believe their authority is unlimited. They need to understand that HOA covenants cannot override state and federal law, cannot interfere with properly permitted businesses, and cannot be used as tools for personal vendettas or financial gain. The bill passed unanimously in both chambers and was signed by the governor. At the signing ceremony, he specifically mentioned my case as an example of why the reforms were necessary. Life gradually returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after such an intense experience. My shop continued operating, fulfilling contracts for bridge projects across Pennsylvania. The new HOA board was professional and reasonable. Patricia served her sentence at a minimum security facility near Pittsburgh, and I honestly never thought about her unless someone brought up the case. The legal bills from the whole ordeal were substantial, even though the court had ordered the HOA to pay my attorney's fees. David Schwartz had worked hundreds of hours on the case, and the final accounting was eye-opening. But the HOA's insurance eventually covered most of it, though premiums for HOA policies across the state skyrocketed after the case, another consequence of Patricia's actions. About a year after the trial, I received a letter forwarded through David's office. It was from Patricia. She had served her prison time and was on probation, working as a cashier at a grocery store in Erie. The letter was an apology. "Mr. Emerson, I know this letter cannot undo the harm I caused you. I let my position as HOA president go to my head. I convinced myself that enforcing rules was more important than respecting people's rights and livelihoods. I was wrong, and I'm deeply sorry for the stress and expense I caused you. I hope you can forgive me, though I understand if you cannot. Sincerely, Patricia Anderson." I showed the letter to my wife, Elena, who I had married 6 months earlier. She had been incredibly supportive during the whole HOA ordeal, even though we were only dating at the time. "What do you think?" I asked her. Elena read the letter carefully. "It sounds genuine." Prison and losing everything probably gave her perspective. Should I respond? "Only if you want to. You don't owe her anything, Eric." I thought about it for several days before writing a brief response through David's office, since I didn't want Patricia to have my direct contact information. I kept it simple. "Miss Anderson, I accept your apology. I hope you've learned from this experience and will treat people better in the future. Eric Emerson." Whether she did learn remained to be seen, but it wasn't my problem anymore. I had moved on with my life and the business was thriving. The 5-year master contract with Penn DOT led to additional opportunities. I started working with the Delaware Department of Transportation and the Maryland State Highway Administration, expanding my client base beyond Pennsylvania. The shop expansion required hiring more employees, and I eventually brought on 4 full-time fabricators and a part-time administrative assistant to handle the growing paperwork. Each new employee represented growth not just for my business, but for the local economy. These were good jobs with solid pay and benefits, the kind of work that supported families and communities. One of my hires, a young fabricator named Miguel, had recently graduated from a welding program at Harrisburg Area Community College. He was talented but inexperienced, so I spent considerable time training him on the precision required for bridge fabrication. Watching him develop, his skills reminded me of when I was starting out, learning the trade from experienced mentors who took the time to teach properly. The Route 15 bridge rehabilitation project became our biggest challenge. The existing bridge was nearly 70 years old and needed extensive structural reinforcement. PennDOT's engineers designed a system of steel reinforcement members that would extend the bridge's life by another 30 years. My shop was responsible for fabricating these custom components, each one precisely engineered to fit the existing structure. Mark Richardson oversaw the engineering review, personally inspecting each component before it shipped to the construction site. The tolerances were incredibly tight, sometimes within 1/16 of an inch over spans of 20 feet. One afternoon, he rejected a beam because the bolt holes were off by 3/32 of an inch. "I know it seems minor," Mark said, "but when you're retrofitting existing structures, precision is everything. If the holes don't line up perfectly, the construction crew has to make field modifications, which weakens the installation." I didn't argue. He was right, and I had my team remake the component. It cost us time and money, but our reputation depended on delivering perfect work. That rejected beam became a teaching moment for Miguel and the other newer fabricators, showing them why precision mattered in structural work. The Route 15 project was completed successfully, and Penn DOT featured it in their annual infrastructure report as an example of effective bridge rehabilitation. The report included photographs of the construction process, and several showed my fabricated components being installed. I kept a copy in the shop office, a reminder of what we were working toward. Not everything was perfect, of course. Running a fabrication shop came with constant challenges. Equipment broke down at inconvenient times. Suppliers shipped wrong materials. Deadlines compressed when weather delayed construction schedules. But these were normal business problems, the kind you solved with planning and hard work, not legal battles with overreaching HOA boards. The second anniversary of Judge Brennan's ruling denying the HOA's injunction passed quietly. I was in the shop fabricating connection plates for a bridge in Lancaster County when I realized the date. 2 years ago, I had been standing in a courtroom wondering if my business would survive. Now, I was running a thriving operation with multiple employees and millions of dollars in contracts. That evening, Alina and I went out to dinner to celebrate. We chose a restaurant in downtown Harrisburg with a view of the Susquehanna River. From our table, we could see the Market Street Bridge, a beautiful structure I had worked on early in my career, fabricating replacement handrail components. "Do you ever think about how different things would be if you had given in to the HOA?" Alina asked. "Sometimes. If I had shut down the shop like Patricia wanted, I would have breached my Penn DOT contracts. I probably would have lost my certifications and my reputation in the industry. The business would have been finished. Instead, you're more successful than ever. Because I knew my rights and I had good legal help. A lot of people in similar situations probably just give up because fighting seems too hard or too expensive." Alina nodded. "That's why those HOA reforms were so important. People need protections against boards that abuse their power." The new HOA regulations had indeed made a difference. David Schwartz told me he had seen a significant decrease in abusive HOA cases since the reforms passed. Boards were more cautious about overreaching, knowing there were real consequences for violations. Homeowners had clearer paths to challenge improper decisions. The system wasn't perfect, but it was better. My story occasionally came up in media coverage of HOA issues. A local news station did a follow-up piece on the 1-year anniversary of Patricia's sentencing, interviewing me about the case's impact. A national consumer protection website featured my experience as a cautionary tale about HOA overreach. Each time, I emphasized the same points. Know your rights, document everything, and don't be afraid to fight back against illegal demands. The 3rd year of the master contract brought new challenges and opportunities. Penn DOT was planning a major bridge replacement on Interstate 81, one of the most heavily trafficked highways in Pennsylvania. The project required fabricating massive steel girders, some weighing over 15 tons each. It was the biggest job my shop had ever undertaken. To handle the scope, I invested in additional equipment, including a larger overhead crane system and an automated welding station. The automation improved consistency and speed, particularly important for repetitive welds on long structural members. Miguel, who had proven himself an exceptional fabricator, helped program the welding system, showing skills beyond basic metalwork. The I-81 project took 8 months from first fabrication to final delivery. Mark Richardson visited the shop regularly during this period, sometimes bringing other Penn DOT engineers to observe our processes. One visiting engineer, a woman named Dr. Susan Whitmore, was particularly impressed by our quality control procedures. "You're implementing protocols I usually only see in much larger fabrication facilities," she told me during her inspection. "Your attention to detail is remarkable. When you're building bridge components, there's no room for mistakes," I replied. "Every piece has to be perfect because people's lives depend on it." Dr. Whitmore included that quote in a presentation she gave at a national transportation conference, citing my shop as an example of small fabricators producing work equal to or better than major industrial operations. The recognition led to inquiries from other state DOTs, and I ended up bidding on projects in New Jersey and West Virginia. Running the business had grown more complex than I ever imagined when I first started. What began as a one-person operation in a shop behind my house had evolved into a legitimate company with employees, multiple clients, and a reputation for excellence. The journey from that confrontation with Patricia Anderson to this point felt almost surreal. The old HOA board's other victims had also moved forward with their lives. The retired teacher, Margaret, had become an advocate for HOA reform, serving on a state advisory committee. The veteran, James, had successfully sued the HOA for their attempted boat parking fine, winning a settlement that paid for his son's college tuition. The elderly widow, Dorothy, had her house fully paid off after the court ordered the HOA to reimburse her for improper fees and legal costs. These stories represented the positive outcomes that emerged from a terrible situation. Patricia's abuses had caused real harm, but the response had created systemic changes that protected thousands of Pennsylvania homeowners. It was a strange silver lining to a dark cloud. As the 5-year master contract with Penn DOT approached its midpoint, I reflected on how the business had changed. The shop employed 6 people now, plus a full-time bookkeeper to manage the increasingly complex finances. We had completed over 30 bridge projects across 4 states, fabricating everything from simple beam connections to massive structural girders. Annual revenue had grown from about $400,000 to over $3 million. None of this would have been possible if the HOA had succeeded in shutting down my operation. Every bridge we contributed to, every job we created, every dollar of economic activity we generated would have been lost. The consequences of Patricia's overreach could have extended far beyond my personal situation. Judge Brennan, in his ruling denying the injunction, had written something that stuck with me. HOAs serve legitimate purposes in maintaining neighborhood standards, but they are not private governments with unlimited authority. When HOA actions contradict law or harm the public interest, courts must intervene. That principle had protected my business and established important precedent. The 4th year of the contract brought an unexpected development. The Federal Highway Administration selected several Penn DOT bridge projects for a national showcase on innovative infrastructure solutions. 2 of the bridges featured components my shop had fabricated. FHA officials visited Pennsylvania to document the projects, and I was interviewed about the fabrication process and quality control methods. The federal recognition elevated my shop's profile significantly. We received inquiries from DOTs in 6 additional states, and I had to make decisions about expansion. Did we want to grow larger, taking on more projects and hiring more employees, or maintain our current size and focus on quality over quantity? Elena and I discussed it extensively. Growing the business was tempting, but it would fundamentally change its nature. I would spend more time managing and less time fabricating. The personal attention to detail that had built our reputation might be harder to maintain with a larger operation. What do you enjoy most about the work? Elena asked one evening as we reviewed business plans. Being in the shop, honestly. Working the machines, seeing raw steel become finished components. The satisfaction of creating something that will last decades and serve an important purpose. Then don't grow so big that you lose that. There's nothing wrong with running a successful small business that does excellent work. She was right, as usual. We decided to maintain our current size, focusing on selecting the best projects rather than taking every opportunity. Quality over quantity became our explicit business philosophy, and we turned down projects that didn't meet our standards or would overextend our capacity. This decision proved wise. Our rejection rate for completed components remained below 2%, far better than industry averages. Client satisfaction stayed high, and Penn DOT continued giving us priority consideration for complex fabrication work. We became known as the shop that might be more expensive but delivered perfect work on time, every time. The fifth and final year of the master contract was bittersweet. The contract had provided stability and growth, allowing me to build a business I was proud of. But it was also time to prove we could thrive beyond a single major contract. We had diversified clients by this point, with active projects in 6 states, so the business wasn't dependent on Penn DOT alone. Mark Richardson, who had been such a strong supporter, retired from Penn DOT in March of that year. His retirement party was held at a conference center in Harrisburg, attended by engineers, contractors, and construction workers from across the state. I brought Alina, and we enjoyed an evening of stories about infrastructure projects and the personalities who made them happen. "Eric, working with you has been one of the highlights of my career," Mark told me during the party. "You're proof that small fabricators can produce world-class work when they care about quality and understand what they're doing. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." "I wouldn't have a career without your support," I replied. "When that HOA was trying to shut me down, your willingness to testify made all the difference." Mark shook his head. "I just told the truth. You did the hard work, both in the shop and in standing up for your rights." That took courage, and it set an important precedent. The master contract officially concluded in June. Penn DOT immediately opened bidding for a new 5-year contract, and my shop submitted a proposal. We were competing against larger companies with more resources, but our track record spoke for itself. In August, we received notification that we had won the contract again, this time for even more annual volume. The notification letter from PennDOT's procurement office included a note from Sarah Chen. "Eric, your shop continues to exemplify the quality and reliability we need in our fabrication partners. Congratulations on this well-deserved award. We look forward to another 5 years of excellent work." Alina and I celebrated that evening with a small party at the shop, inviting the employees and their families. We grilled burgers and hot dogs, set up games for the kids, and gave everyone bonuses as a thank you for their contributions to winning the new contract. Miguel, who had become my lead fabricator, gave a short speech thanking me for the opportunities and training. 5 years ago, I was a recent graduate with a welding certificate and no experience, Miguel said. Eric took a chance on me and taught me what it really means to be a craftsman. Now I'm training others and working on projects that matter. That's the kind of workplace everyone deserves. Watching my employees and their families enjoying the party, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment. This business had survived an existential threat and emerged stronger. We were creating quality work, providing good jobs, and contributing to critical infrastructure. It was meaningful work that made a real difference. The years since the HOA confrontation had taught me important lessons about rights, persistence, and the value of fighting for what's right. When Patricia Anderson first knocked on my shop door with her cease and desist order, I could have folded. It would have been easier in some ways to relocate the business or give up entirely. But I knew I was in the right, and I had the documentation to prove it. That documentation had been crucial. Every permit, every license, every inspection certificate, every contract had played a role in defeating the HOA's claims. The lesson was clear. When you're running a business, especially one that might face scrutiny, maintain impeccable records. Know your rights under local, state, and federal law. Build relationships with regulatory agencies and industry professionals who can support you when challenged. The legal system had worked, though it took time and money. Judge Brennan's fairness and willingness to cut through legal posturing to find the facts had been essential. The criminal justice system's response to Patricia's actions had sent a message that HOA boards aren't above the law. The legislative response had created systemic protections for other homeowners and business owners. But the most important factor had been refusing to be intimidated. Patricia and her enforcement guys had tried to bully me into compliance through threats and illegal actions. Standing firm, documenting their behavior, and pursuing legal remedies had ultimately exposed their misconduct and protected not just my business but other victims as well. 6 years after that first confrontation, I was still running the shop, still fabricating bridge components, still contributing to Pennsylvania's infrastructure. The ironworker machine that Patricia had wanted to silence continued operating, cutting and shaping steel that would support bridges for generations. The noise she had complained about was the sound of important work being done, work that served the public good. Elena often said that the HOA battle was the universe's way of testing whether I really deserved success. By standing up for my rights and exposing corruption, I had proven myself worthy of the opportunities that followed. I didn't know about cosmic tests, but I did know that sometimes doing the right thing, even when it's difficult and expensive, leads to better outcomes than taking the easy path. The shop continued operating, projects continued completing, and life moved forward. The story of the HOA's attempted shutdown became an anecdote I shared when asked about challenges in running a business. It was a reminder that success often requires fighting through obstacles, particularly when bureaucratic systems overreach their authority. Looking back, I was grateful for several things. Grateful for David Schwartz's legal expertise and his willingness to take on a powerful HOA. Grateful for Mark Richardson and the Penn DOT engineers who testified about the importance of my work. Grateful for Judge Brennan's fairness and wisdom. Grateful for the neighbors who supported me once they understood what I was actually doing. Grateful for Elena's support throughout the ordeal and beyond. Most of all, I was grateful I hadn't given up. When facing Patricia's threats and the HOA's harassment, giving up would have been understandable. The stress was intense, the legal bills mounting, the outcome uncertain. But I believed in what I was doing and knew I was right. That belief carried me through the darkest moments of the conflict. The business continued thriving. Bridges continued rising across Pennsylvania and neighboring states, and the ironworker machine continued its essential work. That machine, which had been at the center of the HOA's complaints, was now scheduled to be replaced with a newer model, not because it was failing but because advancing technology offered even better precision and efficiency. The old machine would be donated to a vocational training program where it would teach the next generation of fabricators. As I prepared to order the new equipment, I thought about everything that machine had represented. To Patricia Anderson, it was a nuisance to be eliminated. To me, it was the tool that enabled my craft and my livelihood. To PennDOT, it produced critical infrastructure components. To the traveling public, though they never knew it existed, it contributed to safe bridges that carried them across rivers and valleys. The difference in perspective was profound. What seemed like one thing on the surface was actually something completely different underneath. That lesson applied broadly, not just to ironworker machines but to people, situations, and conflicts. taking time to understand what was really happening, rather than making snap judgments, could prevent enormous problems. If Patricia had approached me differently that first morning, if she had asked questions rather than making demands, the entire situation could have been avoided. I would have explained my work, shown her the permits and contracts, and probably offered to adjust my schedule if certain hours were particularly problematic for nearby residents. Instead, her aggressive approach and unwillingness to listen created an unnecessary confrontation that ultimately destroyed her life and cost the HOA hundreds of thousands of dollars. The new HOA board had learned that lesson. When questions arose about other properties or activities in the neighborhood, they investigated thoroughly and communicated respectfully before taking any action. The reformed HOA functioned as it should, maintaining common areas, ensuring basic property standards, and supporting a pleasant neighborhood environment without overreaching into areas beyond their authority. Tom, the new HOA president, occasionally stopped by the shop to chat. He had become genuinely interested in the fabrication work and liked seeing the bridge components being created. His son, a high school junior interested in engineering, had visited several times, and I enjoyed explaining the structural principles and fabrication techniques. "You know, Eric, what Patricia tried to do to you embarrassed all of us," Tom said during one visit. "Most people on the board had no idea she was filing frivolous lawsuits or misusing HOA funds. We were just neighbors trying to maintain our properties. When everything came out, it was shocking." "I never blamed the general membership," I replied. "Most HOA members are reasonable people who want to live peacefully. The problem was a board that abused its power. The reforms have helped a lot. The mandatory audits and transparency requirements make it much harder for board members to pull what Patricia did. And the legal protections for homeowners mean people aren't afraid to challenge improper decisions." That was the ultimate positive outcome, systemic change that protected people beyond my specific situation. Patricia's law had made a real difference across Pennsylvania, limiting HOA overreach and establishing accountability. Other states had even adopted similar reforms, using Pennsylvania's model as a template. The bridge fabrication business continued its steady operation, year after year, project after project. Each completed bridge was a small victory, a contribution to the infrastructure that connected communities and enabled commerce. The work was often invisible to the general public, but it was essential nonetheless. Standing in the shop on a quiet afternoon, watching Miguel train a new fabricator on proper measuring techniques, I felt a deep satisfaction. This business, which had nearly been destroyed by an overreaching HOA, was now thriving and growing. We were doing important work, employing good people, and contributing to society in meaningful ways. The Ironworker machine continued its rhythmic operation, cutting through steel with precision and power. It was the same sound that had triggered Patricia Anderson's complaint so many years ago, but now it was understood for what it truly was: the sound of craftsmanship, of infrastructure being built, of critical work being done. The noise had never been the problem. The problem had been a failure to understand what that noise represented, and a willingness to abuse authority rather than seek understanding. That lesson, more than anything else from the entire ordeal, stayed with me. Power without wisdom is dangerous. Authority without accountability leads to abuse. And standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, can create positive change that extends far beyond the immediate situation. The HOA had tried to shut me down, but in the end, Their overreach had only made the business stronger and created protections for countless others facing similar challenges. Justice had prevailed, and the bridges kept rising,